Woo! Okay. What's up, everyone? Let's get into the top wildlife cameras of 2023 as far as the different brands. We're going to go over like 8 or 9 different cameras. Kind of my suggestions. It's not necessarily the best camera. It's kind of the best camera within that price range. And I'll kind of give you an upfront kind of speculation or my thought process. A lot of times you can go with a really expensive camera. Let's say a Canon R5, R Mark II, or the Sony A1, $6,500. But the image quality doesn't really kind of go up that much compared to something in the $2,000 range. You know, it's a lot of extra bells and whistles, extra speed in that. So the suggestions for these cameras are going to be kind of in that middle bandwidth. I'm going to try to play the game of getting, the best bang for the buck at the same time getting the best reach in that. So let's start out with Pentax. We're going to go through like Pentax to Sony. Pentax kind of, they've been struggling. They do not have a mirrorless camera, but they got the Pentax K3 Mark III and that. So that's kind of the one that's got the highest pixel count. It's an APS-C sensor, and that's one of the things you're going to notice right up front is I prefer the APS-C sensor cameras because you get a little bit higher pixel density and a little bit better zoom out at that range in that. So the Pentax K3 Mark III is like $2,000. I would pair that with the Pentax 150 to 450 and maybe an adapter. So for that brand, we're looking, 675 millimeters to out to maybe 900. Roughly, I think it's about $4,000 to $4,500 you're going to spend on that setup. But that'd be my suggestion for Pentax. Sigma, not necessarily the first on your mind for wildlife photography, but they do have a pretty kind of interesting camera. It's a small little box camera. You've seen it on this channel before. But yeah, it's 61 megapixels. I would take the Sigma FPL over the Sigma FP. And it's about $2,500, but the claim to fame for that camera system is it's 5-step zoom. So you can go from 61 megapixels to an APS-C sensor, which is 25 megapixels, to 20, to 15, to 10. And I would pair that with the Sigma 150 to 600 in the L mount. It's a native mount. That will get you all the way out to 1,500 millimeters doing 4K video, and you can do 4K raw video, or you can do 10 megapixel images all the way out. And it looks fabulous. It actually does, that camera probably has some of the best wildlife capabilities as far as image quality that you're gonna find. But just know, that's gonna, unfortunately, the camera's $2,500. The lens, the Sigma 150 to 600 is another $1,500. So yeah, you're at $4,000 to $5,000 pretty quickly with that. But it's an option if you're a Sigma lover. The next one on the list is Fuji. Fuji's made a lot of changes in, upgrades to their wildlife photography kit, which I really like. So there's the SHX2 or something, or XXH2. It's a 40 megapixel camera for $2,000. It's one of the highest pixel densities we have, especially for an APS-C sensor camera, but also it allows you a substantial zoom. And I would pair that with the 150 to 600 native Fuji lens, which is an f8, but it's smaller. It's only like 3 pounds. That capability, that camera can do 8K video and 40 megapixels. But if you crop in even more, you're already out at like 1200. So the native lens, zoom is at 600 mil with the 1.5 multiplier, the APS-C sensor. You're at 900 millimeters, which is great. But then you can crop in again to like a 1.25 or 1.29 and get 25 megapixels at like 1280 millimeters. So it's very good for the zoom capability. It's got some great focus capability. I've used it a little bit. If you're a Fuji guy or just someone that might want to make a jump into it, it's a very compelling camera for wildlife. All right, let's talk Panasonic. There's 2 different versions, full frame and micro four thirds. Let's first go over Panasonic. For the full frame, I would suggest the Panasonic S5 Mark II. Unfortunately, it's only 24 megapixels, but if you go up substantially in resolution to their larger cameras like the 45 or 60, you're way up there in price, and I'm not so sure it's worth it. So The S5 Mark II, I would pair with the Sigma L mount 150 to 600. That will get you going pretty well. You're going to get, unfortunately 10 megapixels at 900 millimeters in crop mode. It's a good camera. It's got the latest settings as of 2023. So yeah, the video settings are awesome. It's just a little bit lacking on the wildlife. But that kind of brings us up to date for the next one is the Panasonic Micro Four Thirds, which things change substantially. I think this is a very affordable and good system. So the G9 or the GH6, those two cameras are really good, but there are some differences. The G9 is half the price of the GH6. The G9 is a little bit more centered towards photography and wildlife because it has a 6K photo mode. And then it's not that the GH6 can't do 6K photo mode, it just has 6K video that you can rip into photos. But overall, it's one of those things you're gonna have to look to see for the camera itself. $2,000 for the GH6, only $897 for the G9, which is like a awesome deal. So you can get two of those cameras, and that kind of, it's always one of those toss-ups. It's a great thing. I would pair it with the 100 to 400 Panasonic or the 100 to 400 Olympus, and they have digital teleconverters which work awesome. If you ever watch this channel, you know that it's very hard to tell when you use that 2x digital zoom on the Panasonic and Olympus. It just works, and it works very well. But you could pair it in with a 1.4 multiplier, which is going to get you anywhere from 800 millimeters out to 1200 millimeters native. And then if you use the zoom, you're out to 2400 millimeters. So total price tag, you're anywhere in between like $2,300 for a G9 and the 100 to 400, or I don't know, $3,500 for the $2,000 camera and the $1,500 on that Olympus or Panasonic 100 to 400. Speaking of Micro Four Thirds, another one is the Olympus systems. Again, it has two camera systems, and this is kind of these Micro Four Thirds are the best buy for the buck as far as the capabilities and the bells and whistles, and they throw everything in. Two cameras I'd suggest if you're an Olympus fanboy or that's the route you want to go. EM5 Mark IV is the latest, or I should say, I think it's just the EM5. I think it is the EM5, sorry about that. That's like $1,000, or OM5. And then there's the OM camera. That's $2,000 or $2,200. Now the OM is like everything they've thrown into a camera. Olympus threw in everything, 50 frames a second. They have pro capture mode, capture. They have all this kind of stuff in there. The focus system, a lot of people say it's been revamped. It's way faster. Again, that's $2,200. Plus you're going to spend 100 to 400 Olympus or Panasonic, depending on your choice. That's going to be about $4,000, $3,500, anywhere from $2,500 to $3,500 for those systems. But it's kind of along the lines of the best deal for getting a camera that, a camera system or a brand that they're throwing everything at it for that price tag, where if you go with Sony, you're, $6,000 to $10,000. Let's talk about Nikon. Now, Nikon's a little bit off here because, their bodies, their camera bodies are awesome. They've come out of the gate really hitting. The Z9 is awesome at $5,400, 45 megapixels, 8K video. It's professional grade. It's a little expensive, but once we start going from full frame down to APS-C sensor, it starts dying off. And their Z8, which they recently came out with, looks fantastic as well. But unfortunately, it's $4,000, which then, if you look at their APS-C sensors, cameras, there's not a lot with image stabilization. They're not very high megapixel. Their focus might be a little bit off. So fortunately, I would recommend the Nikon Z7 Mark II at 45 megapixels. In crop mode, it would give you like 18, 20 megapixels. And then unfortunately, pair it with an older converted lens from their F mount. That would be the 200 to 500, maybe with an adapter, a 1.4 adapter. It would get you out to 1,000 millimeters at like 18 megapixels and that. And so unfortunately, Nikon's not there. That once they get those pieces in place, I think they're going to be top of the food chain for wildlife photography. They have an 800mm 6.3. There's a year waiting list. They have 100 to 400, but that 200 to 600 area is still lacking. Total price tag of what I've suggested, the Z7 Mark II is $2,600. The 200 to 500 is like $1,300 with an adapter. So you're probably anywhere from $4,000 to $5,000 for that setup. Next up on the list is Sony, and they're kind of in the same situation as Nikon, a little bit, actually even better because their glass is there, but their cameras. So their APS-C sensor cameras, which I like for wildlife photography, have a tendency not to be there. The 6400, the 6600, during the pandemic, they weren't available and they kind of stopped making them. And that was, 24 megapixels. Paired with the 200 to 600, that would be kind of my choice, but they're not really readily available. So then we have to go into full frame, and that's where Sony has a ton of image or camera systems that are 24 megapixels, but they're not the greatest for wildlife photography until you get to the R3s and R4s. So my suggestion, looking at the way the price down is coming around, the Sony A7 R3 is $2,000, which I think that is a buy definitely, because I've photographed, I've used that camera. It's awesome. The image quality isn't that much better when you go to the Sony A7 R4, which is 61 megapixels. I've used that camera as well. But if I had to choose for the price tag, if someone's, very sensitive to that, you grab the A7 R3 and you grab the 200 to 600 mil lens, and you're roughly at 18 megapixels at 900 millimeters, which is sufficient, good quality. If you want to go up another $1,000, you could go to the Sony A7 R4, and that's 61 megapixels. And then if you really want to go up to 8K video, same sensor, essentially a little bit revamped, 61 megapixels, the Sony A7 R5, that's $3,800, almost $4,000. But to me, suggestions, just grab the Sony A7 R3 with the 200 to 600 and it'll be good enough. It's actually fantastic. It's on the higher end of the image quality from what I've been seeing so far. All right, as you guessed it, the last one, not necessarily the best, but they have kind of things fleshed out, and that's Canon. They have a lot of different systems, and looking at this, I would suggest the R10 or R7 as I have it here, along with the lens. This is one of those things. I've had experiences with the R5. That's a $3,800 camera. It doesn't bring that much more to the table as far as autofocus versus the R7, R10. In fact, right now, the steal seems to be, looking at this camera system, me using the R10, it's a $1,000 camera, and it does, the focus is awesome. It's 24 megapixels. It's an APS-C sensor crop. So with this lens, you could get like 600 mil and 800 mil lens. You can get out to 960 millimeters or 1280 millimeters with this lens. These lenses, these compact primes, they're sharp, they work. So total wise, if you go with the R10 with the 800 mil lens, you're roughly around $1,900, under the $2,000 price mark. And if you go with the R7, you're about $500, $600 more, so about $2,500, and that would do you. So Canon comes in and they've priced their cameras and their setup very well. Now the R7 does have image stabilization, 32 megapixels at 1280 millimeters with the f11 800 mil, 960 millimeters with this lens here. And roughly, if you wanted to get into a birding with the R10, it would probably cost you $600 for this lens and about $1,000 for the R10, and for $1,400 or $1,500, you are off and running. Again, the video looks awesome in these cameras. The eye focus works just as well as the R5, like the high-end stuff. I can't say enough good things about the performance of these cameras. The only downside is months ago is they've kind of restricted third parties from building lenses for these cameras. But there you guys have it. 9 camera systems, roughly my best picks, right in the middle. To me, if you pick and you go up higher, you don't get as much as you think. And then on the lower end spectrum, you're kind of suffering from like bandwidth of buffer rates and that. So right in the middle, I think that's kind of the optimum price to performance ratio. I want to know what you guys think. If you guys like this kind of video, let me know and hit that subscribe. See you next week.